And good day, everybody, and welcome to the professors at McMurry University. I'm Paul Fabrizio.
I'm Don Frazier, and we have joining us Terrance Boyle, TJ to his friends.
And TJ is an assistant professor. Make sure I get this right.
Hopefully, I turn in the portfolio next Monday, so hopefully we get to go up to associate soon.
Okay.
As of right now, it's still assistant.
And you are a professor of biology.
That I am, sir.
Okay, real quickly, what's the difference between assistant and associate? For those who don't know, who might be watching this.
In this rarefied atmosphere that we operate in.
Yeah, so, I mean, it sounds like a big promotion. It is. We've been through it, but explain what it means.
So, for my personal opinion, it's one of those things that you graduate as an undergrad, you go to grad school, and you find out they're going to run you through the rigors of doing your prelims and your defense, and then you do your master's, and you do the exact same thing again, and then they graduate, and they go, well, we need to carry this on into your actual occupation. So you go, you get your job as a tenure track faculty member, and they say, all right, here in 5 or 6 years, you're going to turn in a portfolio and achieve a higher rank. So it is a promotion to the next level within my tenure track of professorship. And eventually, hopefully, I'll become a full professor 5 or so more years down the road.
And these come with a concomitant bump in pay?
So I've been told.
And is there tenure involved in this process?
There is tenure in this process. So tenure, for those who don't know, essentially, it's thought to basically keep my job safe without undue firing, essentially being the key.
Being fired for your opinion.
Fired on the spot. I have a year to make my case.
So that's why we're taping you here.
Yeah, that's right. You know, just in case we need to have memories of you, we can just throw it up on the screen and say, I remember TJ. He was a great guy.
Yeah, he was. Watch this video.
Yeah, you have tenure. I have tenure. What about this guy? Yeah. That's the rarefied atmosphere of academia for you. But now they've added a new step called we'll hire you temporarily, but then you get to jump through hoops before you even get a tenure track position. Right. Yes.
And while we're at it, I was fortunate enough to be hired by Mr. Paul Fabrizio. He was the VPA at the time who...
Wow. What a suck up.
And I've got to throw it in there because I will say this. He was definitely one of the standout reasons when I came that made me feel like I had come to the right place.
Yeah, I'd work for Paul.
So,
thank you
if
both
given
very
the opportunity. And I had an opportunity.
Well, thank you, TJ, and thank you, Don. And so what we want to do is learn about you and what you do because you study a really interesting critter.
Or class of critters.
Or class of critters called crabs.
Yeah.
And how does one get into that? I mean, we're really curious. And what do you learn from studying crabs?
That's got to be the number one question I get is, why crabs?
Yeah. Well,
yeah, I mean,
crabs are cool.
You know,
at low tide, that's what everybody goes looking for.
Right, right.
Well,
but who wants to spend their life studying them? You know, that's what I'm curious.
So to be quite honest with you, I didn't start out looking for crabs. That was never the intent. My original intent was
start out
I always
for crabs or something.
In all the wrong places. Yes.
Actually, I wanted to do just marine biology. That was my overall interest. And
you wanted to swim with dolphins and stuff.
No, I had 3 dolphins tattooed on my arm, to be honest with you. I was really...
So that's what you wanted to do. You wanted to be...
Everybody likes dolphins.
And even to this day, my favorite animal, if I had to put one animal on the table, my favorite is the blue whale. And it's the sheer magnificence of an animal that is over 100 feet long and the insignificance that a human is when swimming in the water next to this creature.
That would be some table to put a blue whale on. You'd have to have a lot of dinner guests. It's like several Inuit tribes coming over. So,
at least.
I get the blubber. Oh, okay. And even the rest of your clan can have it.
And the naivety that goes along with wanting to be a marine biologist to start off with is this obsession with the marine biology, when the reality is it's simply doing biology in the ocean.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And any aspect of biology you can study in a marine environment just like you can on land. So,
did you grow up near water?
No, but my family, we spent a lot of time going to the water.
Aren't you a native Texan?
Not born, but yes.
Okay.
I've been here long enough that I can't count anywhere else.
Have you been baptized in the Brazos? 3 times?
Several times over. Several times over.
Okay, good.
I've been in some of the nastiest water the Brazos can provide.
All right.
Okay. So I'm definitely
you're in.
There. But I grew up on Lake Whitney. Speaking of the Brazos.
Sure.
You know, growing up there, I was always around the water. Water's always been, for my family, one of those places where we go and just relax. And we took many trips when I was a kid down to Port Aransas.
Okay.
And I can remember catching crabs. We'd go crabbing for blue crab.
Absolutely.
and
Chicken neck in a basket over the dock. Absolutely.
Every time. Actually, and we also did the little hook on a piece of string. You throw the chicken leg out and you drag it in slowly while the crab's holding on to it, and then net them up. And it was a blast. Loved it as a kid.
So you study what you killed.
Obviously.
And eat.
And
ate.
As I joke, crabs are the best because they taste good and they've got really cool behavior, so you can't beat it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the
something for everybody.
Okay, but how did you make the transition from loving dolphins
So-
and whales to?
So as an undergrad, one of the things that started to stand out is I really wanted to go to grad school. And you start thinking about research aspects and you start looking at it. And one of the things that becomes abundantly clear very quickly is marine mammals are overstudied.
Yeah.
Everybody studies marine
Oh.
mammals. Everybody.
And where were you as an undergraduate?
I was at Tarleton,
At Tarleton. Okay.
which again is one of those places. How do you do marine
Oh,
biology
geez.
in Stephenville,
And
You
Texas?
go from Stephenville to the Big Blue.
There's got to be a river around
So-
here someplace.
Not much of one. But I took a course in invertebrate zoology from
Okay, say that a little slower.
invertebrate zoology.
So things without a spine,
spine.
Right.
which sometimes includes administrators.
He has issues today, doesn't he? See, I warned you.
So-
Now, zoology. What's zoology?
So zoology is the study of animals.
oh, okay.
Invertebrate zoology is specifically for 98% of the animal kingdom.
Spineless.
So you've had Dr. Joel Brandt on it. It's
Yes.
everything in the world except for what Dr. Brandt studies.
Okay,
essentially.
and he studies the animals that we
Have
all
backbones.
know and
Yeah.
love, and so you study everything
Everything else. And really what drew me
The unlovables.
what
the unlovables.
what drew me to invertebrates is you take a course in vertebrates, whether you're looking at a fish, mammals, any of those groups, and everybody does it the same. They eat the same, they reproduce the same, they have very similar behaviors in what they do because they tend to be the largest organisms in their environment. So they tend to have very similar behaviors across that. But what I saw in the invertebrate world is anything you can dream of, these things show up. When you talk about movies, you were talking about movies earlier. I don't know if you've seen the new Aliens
No,
Predator, not Aliens. Predator
no, I haven't.
is coming out.
I apologize, but no. Have you done?
No, I have
No.
not.
Do y'all remember the Predator movie with
Oh,
Arnold
yeah.
Schwarzenegger? All right. So you've got this
Jaw
horrible guy
thing,
that has
yeah.
his jaws open up.
Yeah.
I can show you the crab that those mouth parts are based on.
Oh, wow.
Okay. It's a type of crab that he opens up his jaws, the mandibles exact same way. It is literally spot on picture. And when you start looking at movie monsters all over the place, this is what you see repeatedly are these examples that they've pulled from invertebrates and they've just blown them up to huge size to make them scary. Okay.
Yeah, you never see the homicidal dolphin.
Yeah, that doesn't.
No,
Well,
you're right. We don't.
It probably isn't a B movie. There probably is a B
Well,
movie
The
somewhere
Shape of
with-
Water, but he wasn't homicidal.
No, that's right. He was a lover.
There was something that opened up there.
Yeah,
too,
that's
in
a whole
that
nother
movie,
story.
it turns out.
So it really got me thinking about inverts, and I wanted to do something with invertebrates, and I hadn't really decided on crabs yet until I graduated from Tarleton. And as a bad student, I had not submitted applications to graduate schools early enough. So my undergraduate advisor goes, well, why don't you do a master's program with me here at Tarleton? I went, okay, let's do a
Oh,
master's
wow.
program with you at
Just
Tarleton.
rolled you right in.
And he happened to be working with this crab species.
Really?
And
What kind?
So it's a white-fingered mud crab. It's a crab about the size of a quarter at its
Okay.
largest. And it was in Possum Kingdom Lake.
Really?
And I went, I've grown up on the Brazos and I've never seen crabs in the lake. So
Yeah.
I'm interested. Let's see what this is about. And it turns out it's an invasive species that was introduced into Possum Kingdom sometime in the 70s, we're guessing.
Okay.
Now, it wasn't originally found until 97 was when we have the first documented that someone actually noticed it.
Yeah.
And it's since spread to about 10 different lakes here in Texas.
Wow. Now, where does it occur naturally?
From Newfoundland, Canada, all the way down the East Coast to Veracruz, Mexico.
So these are saltwater crabs
It's
or brackish crabs.
yes, it's an estuarine species.
Okay.
So it's
Oh,
estuarine.
estuarine.
So
Which means
it's found in an estuary
Okay.
where a river connects to some ocean body.
Okay.
Okay.
And so it's salty enough in the Brazos watershed to.
Well, that's where the interesting thing comes about this crab, because this crab tends to live in the upper reaches of an estuary where that freshwater flow tends to overlap.
Okay.
So in its normal range, you'll see salinities anywhere from freshwater, pure 0, all the way up to about 44 parts per thousand.
Wow.
Okay.
So we know the crab can exist as an adult just fine in the lakes.
Wow.
What we didn't know was whether or not they could reproduce or not. And that's what most of my research has gone into.
Apparently they can.
Yes. So you study reproduction of crabs.
That's one thing I study, yes.
Okay.
Are we going to talk about that after the break?
I guess we're going to talk about that after the break.
So I knew this was going to be one of our more salacious episodes.
No, not on the professors.
All right. We'll be right back.
Don't skip! Don't skip! Don't skip!
Hello, my name is Christopher Bartlett. I'm the studio manager with the McWhinney History Education Group, and you may be used to seeing my name in the end credits, or sometimes you'll see me sitting here as a special guest host. But right now, I'm here to talk to you about an amazing new opportunity. We have created a Patreon. To put it simply, if you enjoy the content on this YouTube channel, then you can head on over to Patreon, donate money to us, and become a patron. And through your donations, more content will be made. Basically, it breaks down like this. With $10, you will receive a short thank you video from Dr. Frazier and Dr. Fabrizio. With $25, you will be able to take part in a patron-only poll. With $50, you will get swag. These items include a choice between 2 prints of paintings and signed copies of Dr. Frazier's books, Blood on the Bayou and Thunder Across the Swamp. With $75, you will receive exclusive videos that will not be available anywhere else, not on YouTube and not on SoundCloud. These videos will be just for you, the patrons. With $100, your name will appear in the credits. See that right there? That's where your name can be. Finally, for $500, we will send you a signed collector's edition of Phil Collins' book, The Alamo and Beyond. Yes, it is signed by Phil Collins himself. And remember, for all the higher donations you do, you also get the stuff from the lower ones as well. So it's pretty cool. And when we reach our goal of $5,000, Dr. Frazier and Dr. Fabrizio will give you their own personal ranking of the presidents from worst to best. Coming from the perspective of a historian like Dr. Frazier and a political science expert like Dr. Fabrizio, you really don't want to miss their ranking and why they put them in that order. If you enjoy this content and want to see more, if you believe in our mission of making history accessible to everyone, then head on over to our Patreon and donate as much money as you're willing to give. You'll help us continue what we're doing, and you'll get amazing gifts as our way of saying thank you. Now we return to your regularly scheduled programming.
And we're back, and I'm Paul Fabrizio.
I'm Don Frazier, and we're getting crabby today with DJ Boyle.
At least you're smiling when you say that.
That's right.
Yes, we are. And
You're
we're the
so
professors
crabby.
at McMurry, even though I'm not sure after the show is over whether McMurry will have anything to do with us.
Not
tenure.
Yeah,
Okay,
weird.
so anyway, you left us with crabs and reproduction.
Reproducing white-fingered mud crabs.
Very good.
Exactly.
Which were not normally found in Possum Kingdom.
Exactly.
And then
they're
they
definitely
were
not
found.
native.
By the way, I'm curious. You said that they were discovered for sure 1997, and you figured out that they were introduced sometime in the 70s. How do you work backwards?
So that's a wonderful question. It's a good guesstimate, and basically what we're looking at is how prevalent the crab is at the time we find it.
Okay.
Okay, so we
Big
find them,
population,
yeah.
you can extrapolate.
So
and
you
it-
just
and it's a huge lake. You find them throughout the entire lake at that time,
all depths?
as opposed to being at
Okay.
all depths, as opposed to being just in one spot, a localized introduction. So, for instance, if it had been a really recent introduction, say a fisherman had just come back and dumped them out, we'd have found them right there and likely would not have found them anywhere else in the lake. But instead, what we found were all age sizes, and everywhere throughout the lake. So the best guess is it was definitely prevalent before that. The other reason we said probably the early 70s, sometime in the 70s, is because my major professor at that time had also been studying the lakes, and his advisor before him at TCU had been studying those lakes, and nobody had ever seen this crab throughout
Up
that
to
time.
a certain point,
So
and then
the
So that's where
guessing
the
is somewhere in
historian comes
between.
in.
yeah,
Oh, definitely. There's no doubt about that. And it's one of those things. A lot of times, the reluctance of a trained biologist or trained anything to talk to lay people sometimes gets in the way
Sure.
of actual knowledge.
Professor Corncob
and-
has a hard time talking to the denizens of the bait shop.
And it is
Yes.
definitely one of those things that I've used fishermen to my advantage in every way possible, trying
Yeah.
to find it, because fishermen know it. They're out there on the lake all the time.
Yeah.
If crabs are there, they're going to see it. And,
I was gutting this largemouth bass, and he had 3 of these little buggers in his gut.
and incidentally, how I knew that they were in Lake Whitney when they showed up in Lake Whitney about 2003 was the first time we documented them. I had been told by a fisherman that he found them in a catfish.
Oh,
So I went
okay.
and
And
sure
you-
enough looked, and there they were. Found them
Okay.
right there.
How does a crab go from one place to another, one lake to another, one estuary to?
Again, this is where some guesstimation comes into it, to be perfectly honest with you. So this crab has a notorious history of being introduced across the world. It is basically found worldwide now. And one of the reasons for that is, again, its salinity tolerance is over a really wide range.
It's
As
a
an
rugged
adult.
little dude.
It's very hardy. And actually, if you do literature searches on it, one of the number one uses is by physiologists that were studying the impacts of various pesticides and other things that were going to be dumped into aquatic environments to
Oh,
see.
wow.
Because if you can kill Rithro, you can kill anything,
Mhm.
kind of idea. So it's been well used. And with the introductions, we know that it was introduced into the west coast of the United States through oyster mariculture. So they
Through
started
oyster.
mariculture. Mariculture is taking marine species or all those and growing them for harvesting.
Oh,
Farming.
okay.
Farming.
Yeah, like
just-
shrimp
yeah.
farm, oyster farm.
Yeah.
So in this
Cat-
case,
catfish farm.
so in this case, what they were doing is taking oysters from Chesapeake Bay, throwing them on a train, shipping them across to San Francisco, and they got introduced in San Francisco Bay in like 1937.
As a
somewhere around there.
collateral species that got caught up
Mhm.
in the harvest. Okay.
Yeah, and if you've ever been around oysters, it's really hard to go into an oyster cluster and try to pick out everything.
Yeah.
Clean it out. So this was hardly the only thing that was introduced, but because it's hardy, it's one of those that would actually be successful once it got there. It's gonna get there. In the case of these freshwater lakes, our best guess is that they came in actually as larval stages. Crab species, for the most part, live in a particular environment, and then when the eggs hatch, it's a planktonic stage, and a plankton means that it's floating in the water column.
Okay.
Okay. Rithro again is kind of an interesting this, and I apologize for using a genus. That's just what I normally talk about.
Rithro.
It's Rithropanopius, so I shortened it down to Rithro.
Can you kill it with erythromycin?
No.
Okay.
Definitely not a bacteria. So
I
don't worry
wanted
on
to. I wanted to sound scientific.
it.
And you succeeded.
So this crab, when the larvae generally, most species, so if you have like a blue crab, a blue crab hatches out in the estuary,
Mhm.
the larval stage goes in the water column, and it normally puts its babies up into the water when the tide is going out, because the crab does most of its development out in the open Gulf,
Okay.
and then it
okay.
swims back in once it hits a certain stage. Rithro is unusual because Rithro releases its larvae when the tide's coming in. It does what's called larval retainment, and it keeps the babies in the same area where the adults are, and that's generally a lower salinity area. What's important to note about that is in Texas, we have a lot of stocking of most of our freshwater reservoirs.
Sure.
Okay. And there are 2 saltwater species we generally bring in, striped bass and redfish.
Okay.
One of the largest redfish hatcheries that had ever been in Texas was down off Palacios Bay.
Okay.
Okay. And when you go to those hatcheries, they get their water from the bay. Got the lovely pipes, bring it over, dump it in. Well, anything that's in the water
It's
Gets
now in the
So,
tank.
so
yeah.
the larva.
So they'll pull the larvae in, and actually in some of those hatcheries down on the coast, you can actually find adults. We'll get into it. And Possum Kingdom's hatchery up here, they've got adult crabs in theirs because they bring the water in and the crabs will come in with it. They're small enough guys. If they're close to the intake pipe, they'll get sucked through.
Wow.
So this is just an accidental thing. That's not deliberate,
No intention.
but it's happened.
Mhm.
And it could happen again at other lakes that don't have them.
Well, that's one of those interesting things because North Carolina is actually who taught Texas how to stock saltwater species. North Carolina figured this out with striped bass when they started blocking off some of these rivers. And they had these inland populations of striped bass that were going up to reproduce. And they went, hey, wait a second. This fish will actually live here. It's a great sport fish. Let's stock them. So they got into stocking them. And Texas jumped on board really quickly. Well, North Carolina happens to be one of the locations where almost, I would garner to say 70% of the papers that have been written about this crab, research-wise, have been done for North Carolina populations.
Okay.
Correlation there.
But yet they don't exist in any freshwater reservoir in North Carolina.
Really?
The only location these crabs have shown up in inland lakes is dear old Texas.
So what does that mean?
Well,
I mean, you have something like that.
so-
You're a scientist.
So
What does
that was
mean?
my dissertation. And,
Okay.
and what it means to me is there's something different in the crabs that introduced into the Texas lakes from those North Carolina lakes. So that's what my
So
dissertation
genetically,
set out to
maybe
do.
an adaptation.
So there most likely is a genetic difference, but the difference is in the regulation of things. Okay, so when I look at a gene, let's say you're looking at a gene that you have both of you have brown hair, but one of you has a darker brown versus another. So the gene is exactly the same. It codes for brown hair for both of you. The difference is the quantity that's being produced. So you have another gene that regulates how much is being produced by these genes.
Okay.
That's where the change is. Okay. Now, exactly what gene that is, I have no idea in these crabs.
Yeah.
But what I ended up doing over my research through my master's and my dissertation was to show that these crabs are capable of reproducing at lower salinities than has ever been shown in any coastal population. And what it suggests is that most likely that change occurred in the Texas population on the coast where these crabs were introduced from.
Okay.
And it's unique. And I honestly think it's probably unique to the entire Gulf,
Okay.
as opposed to
The
being
eastern
just the Texas
seaboard.
coast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to have to take another break. I'm just trying to envision you. Not only are you out in the water, but you're behind a microscope too as you study these
Very
things.
much so.
Okay, we'll be back.
Welcome to State House Press, a nonprofit publisher of quality books. State House Press and the McMurry Foundation Press are part of the Texas A&M University Press Consortium, which handles retail distribution for several small but distinguished publishers. Our entire list of offerings, with pictures, summaries, prices, and easy online ordering, is available in our section of the Consortium website. State House Press is proud of its reputation for high standards of scholarship and readability. In addition to this, we at State House Press have recruited the talents of individuals such as Phil Collins on his book, The Alamo and Beyond. We release not only texana by contemporary authors, but reprints of classic accounts of Texas life and history otherwise inaccessible to the public. Our book list also incorporates the publications of the McMurry Foundation Press, specializing in the history of the Old South and the Civil War. We strive with our titles to make history accessible to as many readers as possible. To accomplish this task, we have recruited some of America's leading historians, as well as bright new scholars. We believe firmly in narrative history, in telling a good story, and in telling it well, without losing sight of the people who've made history and the events that changed a nation.
For questions or business inquiries, please visit the Texas Book Consortium at www.tamupress.com.
Bear Leader Tours. Where will Bear Leader Tours take you? Everywhere. Paris. Bruges. Trier. Battlefields. Pearl Harbor. Pacific Beaches. New Orleans. Join the adventure.
www.mcwhinney.org.
When you support McMurry History Education Group, you also support the many young workers who operate and maintain the company's digital operations. These are dedicated university students who handle many things such as filming, recording, and editing content for McMurry, as well as cultivate the layout and structure of McMurry's various websites, including its associated channel on YouTube. We are a nonprofit organization that exists from donations from interested persons and history enthusiasts alike. Donations enable our students to obtain a higher education, job training, and career bolstering skills. If you would like to donate, please visit us at www.mcwinnie.org and click on our About Us tab to learn more.
And we're back, and this is Paul Fabrizio.
I'm Don Frazier.
And we're here with TJ Boyle, assistant professor, hopefully soon associate professor with tenure of biology here at McMurry University. Now, we're talking about crabs, and the type of crab that we're talking about that you studied is, again,
The white-fingered mud crab.
the white-fingered mud crab.
Right. That's the common name that's most commonly associated with it. Any of these kind of crabs, you get a lot of common names out there, which
Like
so well, mud crab in general, xanthids is another name that they'll use for them. And that's because
that still sounds like pharma.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Xanthid.
there's a family of crabs called the xanthoids that all have this very common crab shape that you most commonly associate. So we call it xanthids.
You mentioned that the size is real small, like the size of a quarter.
Yeah.
Is there any other way if somebody sees it, they know what it is?
If you're in a freshwater lake in Texas, it's the only crab you're going to
If
find.
there's a crab,
Okay.
it might be
There you go.
xanthid or
Okay.
the white-fingered fellow giving
there's-
you the white-fingered.
Right.
Yes.
But if you go to the coast,
There'll be
you're-
a whole bunch of different
yeah, there's
crabs.
about 8 different species that you can find in a common bay in Texas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, it seems like you'd have crab versus crayfish wars.
Great segue, because that's the other part of my dissertation, was actually looking at what effect does this crab have in an environment. And while I like the crabs, this is really what it gets at. I'm very much an ecologist at heart. I want to understand the big picture of how a system works. And the crabs, because of their hardiness and their ease to keep in an aquarium, make really good study animals. They're really easy to keep. I can do all kinds of weird stuff to them, and they don't mind. And they do what they do.
What do you do?
Well, one of the
I'm
things
just curious.
Make them smug.
one of the
What do you
things
do
That was
with the crab?
That was the funniest experiment I saw him do. It's in there puffing along. Hey, what do you want?
So one of the things that I looked at.
Is there anything we should be worried about
No.
here?
No, it's all within ethical standards. I'm not doing anything unethical there. But one of the things I noticed in Possum Kingdom when I was scuba diving collecting these crabs was there weren't any crayfish.
Mm-hmm.
And as a kid who grew up scuba diving in Texas lakes, that you flip over rocks, you find crayfish.
Everywhere.
I go to PK and there's no crayfish anywhere. They're literally, I had probably 60, 70 hours of dive time on that lake
And
over
never
4
saw
years
a
and never
cray-
saw a crayfish.
Wow. That's a sign.
Yeah.
a sign.
So of some sort of competitive exclusion, something's going on that potentially the crab's outcompeting the crayfish. So during my dissertation, I actually tested this. And to your point of what I did, the first thing I did is I put a crayfish and a crab in a tank. Said, what happens?
Did they fight each other?
The
I mean,
crab,
did you take bets?
the
and stuff like that?
crayfish literally ripped the crab into halves.
Yeah, crayfish are vicious.
It grabbed it and literally just tore it into pieces.
Crawdad.
I've got it on video. I'll show it to you sometime.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd
Okay.
be great.
So it tears them apart. And the first thing I went was, well, this isn't happening as adults.
Yeah.
So I need to stop and think about this. And I remembered reading a paper at some point about crayfish, because crayfish, again, is one of those things that's been studied a lot. It's a good hardy species.
Especially in Louisiana.
And yeah,
Mostly involving recipes.
there's some good ones.
Yeah.
When you look at a crayfish as it develops, a lot of invertebrates have this thing where their first neural system that develops, they get one real big nerve that takes over and supersedes everything. So their behaviors as a juvenile are very prescripted. If you do
Okay.
something to it, it automatically will do whatever that is.
Okay.
And in the case of a crayfish, up until they reach about 2 inches in size, maybe a little bit less than that, if you scare it, it automatically does a tail flip and swims away.
Sure.
It will not
Okay.
do anything else. It will not be aggressive in any form. It just tail flips away. So I said, all right, well, if that's the program behavior, let's see what happens when you put the crabs in with these little guys, because an adult crab at that quarter size is about the same size as some of these juvenile crayfish, these small guys. So you put them in a tank, and what happens is they never have that interaction, because anytime the crab gets close, the crayfish jumps away. And where I draw this out from it is essentially what I think is happening is in these lakes is the crab doesn't actually do anything to the crayfish. Crabs, this particular species, is actually relatively complacent. So one of the other things I do with crabs is I made this lovely little apparatus, and I took different species of crabs and I put them in and I forced them to interact with each other, because I wanted to see how close you could get them before they would get aggressive.
And they didn't like it.
Out of the 7 species I tested, Rithro was the one that didn't really care. You could put another crab right on top of him, and he'd just kind of push it off and sit.
Super mellow.
Where the others were very aggressive towards each other.
Okay.
So where you find these crabs are generally under rocks, hiding from fish. The same place you find crayfish, hiding from fish. So the idea here is, at the juvenile stage, this adult crab comes up, climbs under a rock, baby crayfish is under there. The crayfish can't defend itself. It's going to tail flip out. Well, the fish that chased the crab in gets a crayfish that jumps out and eats it. And I think that's honestly what happened is they simply...
It's a metaphor for life.
Yeah, I was going to say, there are lessons to be learned here.
Well, and I think one of the biggest lessons is all too often we tend to think of things having a direct impact. It's all about that direct impact, when this is a great example of something that it's not the direct interaction that's causing a problem. It's a side interaction. It's a consequence of what this other one is doing that's causing this behavior elsewhere. And it was a really cool, interesting. So at the same time, then you take it to the next level and go, okay, well, if the crayfish are disappearing, what impact does that have on the fisheries?
Yeah.
Right. The answer is nothing, because the fish eat the crabs just like they eat the crayfish.
Yeah.
So you get rid of crayfish and nobody cares.
For the people, most people, yes. The fishermen don't care because the fish are still fat and big, and they have no problem.
You're
the zoologist looks at it and goes, we're getting rid of a native species. And that's a problem.
Why is it a problem?
Well,
I mean, it strikes me as you're replacing one with the other. So what?
Because it's human mediated. That's the so what. This is one of those things where potentially in the next 30 million years, the crab may walk its entire way up the Brazos River. That's possible. Not very likely, but it's possible.
So it could be in Lubbock.
Exactly.
And this is a bad thing?
It is, in the sense of, not if it did it naturally, if it did it on its own. The problem here is this is something that we've done. We introduced the crab. We caused the demise of the species. Now, we can take that even further, because is Possum Kingdom a natural lake?
No.
No, so it's not even a natural habitat.
Yeah.
So now we get into a whole nother world of ethics, of biology, of, okay, so what? You introduce something into a non-native habitat, what difference does it make if it's not a natural?
Why are we even concerned about this?
Because it represents the potential to do other things as well. Okay, so for instance, the crayfish may not have that big of an impact right now, but maybe raccoons don't eat the crabs the way they eat crayfish, because maybe they don't notice them under the rocks the way that they would a crayfish. So we can impact those species.
But we don't know that.
No, we don't. And one of the things that I'm looking for is potentially looking at the effect on bird species. We have a lot of birds that pass through that are wader birds that feed in the shallows. I don't know what impact they are. I don't know if they're feeding on the crabs just like the fish do.
So if you have a crab-eating raccoon, they should contact you.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Just so I know.
Here comes Bandit. He's eating a crab. Hurry, call TJ Boyle.
Is your focus as an ecologist to return things to a natural state?
So,
and as a historian, I'd like to know what year you're picking.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me as there's all sorts of issues with.
So here's the dilemma you need to understand the difference between. Am I an ecologist or a conservationist?
I don't know. What are you?
I'm an ecologist.
Okay, so
I differentiate those two. Conservationists tend to have a fair amount of ecology, but conservation is all about preserving what is. They want to preserve it in its native habitat. Now, we can go right back to Don's point. Which year are you talking about?
Right.
Okay. Which habitat are you trying to get it to? Because that's a huge question out there. As an ecologist, I have some concern towards those, and it's more of preserving the overall habitat. So for instance, this crab, if the crab is only out competing the crayfish and the fish doesn't change and the crab's doing the other things that it needs to do that the crayfish did,
And the birds.
then the
aren't
reality
affected.
is there's not a problem with it. But I don't know that there's not a problem with it yet.
So are you looking for?
I am looking for other species that the crab may be impacting, and mostly insect larvae that live in the similar habitats with them. That's what my current research right now is focusing, is trying to identify some other species that I can do competition studies with the crab to see if it has other impacts. But ultimately, as an ecologist, I don't have as much concern about trying to get it back to a native.
What is your
Okay.
concern? We got like
My
30 seconds.
My
So
concern
how
is
would you define
understanding
it?
how it works. I want to know how those interactions work. What are those interactions between this species and other species? And getting a better grasp on how to identify what those interactions are and trying to take those ripple effects out to understand the overall interactions that are going on. How does it all work together?
Are you confident by the time you retire you'll have this all figured
Absolutely not.
out? Okay, good. to
Yeah,
know.
so it sounds like there's a lot of work here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely not. It's definitely one of those areas where I'm going to pass it on and
And your
hope someone
students
takes it on and keeps going.
All right,
Okay.
we're going to pick it back up after this break. We'll be right back.
History has become one of the most fought over battlegrounds in terms of shifting people's views and opinions about their country. In response to this, we have decided to launch a website called Go To History that will become your home for clear-eyed history content. Our objective is to put history out there, free of agendas, and allow you, the viewers, to decide what you believe and decide how to interpret this information. With experienced professors such as Dr. Don Frazier and Dr. Stephen Harden teaching courses and creating agenda-free content for students and just plain history enthusiasts, the content of Go To History is vastly informative and unbiased.
Hey, history people, it's Phil Collins here. I am just giving a shout out to a couple of guys that you're going to be hearing from. And they're good friends of mine, but they're also incredibly knowledgeable historians. Dr. Donald Frazier and Dr. Stephen Harden. Both great friends of mine, both helped me out with my book on the Alamo. And two guys, if you don't know much about history, these are the first two guys you should go to. Okay, what they don't know isn't worth knowing. Don Frazier, Steve Harden, I hope you enjoy their presentations.
My name is Evan Williams, a history major at McMurry University, and I love the layout of the Go To website. I mean, it is singularly built from the ground up with user convenience in mind. Every study available is within a single courses tab, with each lesson having a single page for each of its individual videos, text, visuals, and quizzes, all at easy grasp. This is most definitely history made simple.
Please log on to www.gotohistory.com. This portion of the show is reserved for advertisements. If you are interested in filling this portion with ads for your business, please call 325-793-4686 or email director@tfhcc.com.
And we're back. I'm Paul Fabrizio.
We're talking crayfish with Don Frazier and TJ Boyle.
I thought we were talking crabs.
Well, we're about to talk crayfish.
yes, we are.
All of the above.
Yeah. So you've taken us on quite a journey.
Well, and what really prompted this conversation is I used to raise crayfish in an aquarium, and I had a little musk turtle, and one day I went from having 6 crayfish to one really big one, and not even a turtle. So I mean, these things are, crayfish when they get big, they can be pretty ferocious.
And so you decided you couldn't take care of this crayfish
Yeah, and I
anymore.
put it back. Yeah, because
So you
I
dumped it in some
put it back in
natural-
a stock tank. Yeah, pretty much where I got it from. So you were asking if this was a good idea.
Yeah, because you hear all the time about people, they have pets and they can't handle them anymore, so they just dump them back where they found them, that sort of thing.
Right.
And you think of the Florida Everglades, for example, which, this national park that's absolutely beautiful, but there's
Infested with pythons.
yeah, infested with snakes that don't belong.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about
So
people doing these things, and is it good or is it bad?
in the case of Dawn taking a native species of crayfish in, feeding it up, putting it back out, it's not really going to do much harm.
Now,
Even
I fed
though,
it. I
even
fed
though
it.
he fed it bacon.
I fed it bacon, so now do I have a carnivorous crayfish that I'm introduced into?
This
pond?
crayfish is
Not
on
likely.
steroids. Okay,
Not
is this a
likely. I
good
mean,
thing?
If you actually got it to a really large size, which one of the things with invertebrates is, in a lot of cases, we don't really know how big they can get. And it's because invertebrates have a tendency to just continue to grow as long as they're alive. So with these crabs, when I tell you the ones about the size of a quarter, that's probably a crab that's at least 6 years old. And that's really at the height of their normal age limit that we know of in the wild. They're more likely to get killed. And the same thing's kind of true with crayfish. Most crayfish you're going to find are generally in that 3 to 4 inch range, but occasionally you'll get that one that's
How big was
pushing
yours,
on a
Don?
foot.
Gosh, that thing! By the time I put him back in the pond, he was about 6 inches, and that's
Okay.
a big crawdad.
Yeah, and in the Comal, where I was telling you guys over the break that we collected for my dissertation, catching the crayfish there. I found one crayfish in a hole that I refused to try to pull out because when I went to get him, his merrill spread, which is what they call when you spread his arms, I call it doing the tricky dick.
Yeah.
Okay.
For Richard Nixon.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, people may be listening to this instead of watching and wondering what the reference to Tricky Dick was.
Sorry. But when they do that merrill spread, his merrill spread was at least a foot.
Wow, that's a big
He
crawfish.
is a massive, massive
Yeah.
crawfish.
I gave up on mine well before then.
Yeah, and with that guy, I just left him be. But he had to have been a very old
Old dude.
old crayfish.
Old moss horn.
When you look at lobsters,
Yeah.
one of those great things nowadays, most lobsters we get on a plate are a pound lobster.
Yeah, pound and a quarter.
To get to be about a pound and a quarter, that's about a 10 to 15-year-old lobster.
Yeah.
Okay. If you go back to colonial times when they were feeding the prisoners lobster dinner because it was still biblical that you didn't eat that kind of stuff, you were talking about catching 3.5, 4 pound lobsters on the average.
Wow.
Which
They
are
were
terrible.
massive.
They taste so bad.
Oh, the bigger they are, the
Yeah, it
worse they
tastes like
taste?
eating a pencil eraser with no real taste to it, man. It's terrible.
The largest lobster off the American coast we've ever measured, they did it in a sub and they laid a Louisville bat, 36-inch slugger down next to this, and that was just his body. That didn't include his claws.
Wow.
Going out the front of him. He was probably around 4.5 feet at least
That's
total
a
length.
big lobster.
Yeah, that's a massive lobster. And they guesstimated his age at least 100 years,
Yeah.
if not
Wow.
more. So we don't really know how long and how old they can get. But again, in the case of the native, so if you got him up to a really, really big size,
Yeah.
then he might be able to cause a little bit of harm,
Yeah.
but most likely something could still get him.
Sure.
A large mouth, black bass, raccoon, something's going to get him.
There's always something with more teeth and a bigger mouth.
But in the case of bringing in your pet snake that's from Southeast Asia or from South America and introducing that into a native habitat, that's a whole nother issue of problems because now we've got an animal that doesn't have a predator. So it gets to these, generally people don't take their baby snakes and dump those into the Everglades. They dump the
Snake that
4 foot
just
long
killed
snake
their
that-
dog.
yeah, that they've got to get rid of now.
And they don't want to kill it, so
So the animals are already past a size where most of the mid-sized predators can't handle it,
Yeah.
so they couldn't take care of it. It's only going to be the big predators, and there's not that many of them.
You were talking about histropostums or something like that in
So-
the Comal River.
So in the Comal, besides the crayfish, the other thing we find are plecostomus, these armored catfish from South
something like
America
that.
these armored catfish. Think about that.
that everybody's used to seeing in aquariums because they're the sucker fish that people know eating the algae along the glass.
Okay.
And you go, how on earth do you get in a Comal? Well, Texas State is right up the road there. Those kids get done with the semester, they go dump their aquarium in the Comal, And suddenly we have thousands of these fish that should not be in the comal. They shouldn't be there, but they are there.
And that's what you as an ecologist would be concerned about.
Right, because it's going to start to change what's going on in that environment. So if I go out and I spend 100 years studying this environment, I'm going to have a pretty good understanding of how it works.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are pieces I don't know. But when you suddenly throw in a new species, you change, because of all those ripple effects, everything else that's going on there. And now we're back to square one on studying this all over again, trying to figure out what those impacts are, where it goes. And again, we have so many unintended consequences. Australia is the classic example of ecological disasters that were caused by people. So we have a bunch of people farming sheep. We have dingoes. We go, hey, we don't want the dingoes eating our sheep, so let's kill all the dingoes.
Maybe the dingo ate your baby. Anyhow, sorry.
So they go out, they kill off all these dingoes. Well, now the sheep have broken legs because all the hares, the natural rabbits in the area, suddenly don't have a predator eating them anymore. They're reproducing like rabbits. And now we have all these rabbit holes and the sheep are breaking their legs in it. So do you give up one sheep for food or hundreds of them with broken legs? So they have to reintroduce dogs to get rid of the rabbits that were being controlled by the dingoes that if they'd have just left them alone had been all right.
You know, I just saw an article about Pablo Escobar's hippopotamus herd.
Yes.
Hippopotami. Did you see that article?
I saw the article. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I just think that's remarkable that we have this guy who had a private zoo in South America. He gets pinched for being a drug lord. And then all of a sudden, all of his creatures are, running wild in northern.
Yeah, exactly. And so what do you do about that?
I'm not that familiar with this actual example, but that's utterly amazing that someone would want a herd of hippos. Because if you don't realize this, the most dangerous animal in Africa is a hippopotamus. Yeah. They kill more people per year than any other.
If you're a drug lord, it might be.
Animal.
Yeah, we're talking Pablo Escobar.
These are not, pets. These are watch hippos.
That's right. And you have to question his judgment anyway in this whole
thing. Do they come with little lasers on their heads?
I don't know, man. Jose, release the hippos.
TJ, we're running out of time. We got about 25 seconds. Parting words of wisdom for our listeners.
If it's in the native habitat, leave it. Observe it where it is. You don't have to take it home and put it in an aquarium to watch it. Leave it where it is. Observe it in its natural state. And oftentimes it's a lot more beautiful there anyway.
Final word. All right.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thanks, TJ.
All right. Class dismissed.